What's up, everybody? It's Solon. Today we are here in the Fallen Eagle, and today I'm going to be recommending you some starts that I think you might enjoy. Some of them are bookmark characters, some of them aren't, but all of them are a pretty good time and should give you something interesting to do in the mod because there's a lot of start dates, a lot of options to pick from, and it can be kind of overwhelming if you're a first-time player and maybe aren't too familiar with the time period. So starting off here in the earliest start date of 361, we have one that's probably not on a lot of people's radar, and this is Angantyr. He's down here in what would be modern-day southern Sweden. Now, this character is from the saga of Hervor and Heidrek, which is a epic saga that details the journey of a magical cursed sword known as Tyrfinger. And this is across various periods, starting with the war between the Goths and the Huns, and then stemming, I think, until like the High Middle Ages, if I'm not mistaken, maybe a little bit earlier than that. So numerous authors have been inspired by this, both in medieval times and in contemporary times, to include Tolkien, who I believe used this to establish backstory for Middle-earth. Most likely in the Cursed Blade as seen in the Children of Húrin, if you're familiar with that work. It's just a cool character. It's a cool nod to a kind of obscure saga, and it shows, I think, if anything, just the attention to detail that the mod creators have for this setting. It's not Rome focused, it's not Goth focused, it's not like Celts or anything. It's very uniquely still like a Norse setting, but much further back than, the Viking Age. So number 2, we're going to turn away from Rome again, and I'm actually going to leave it on this screen because I want you to see how many wars you start off with here. This is 10 different wars. These are against various Hunnic tribes. This is the Hunnic Empire start. Now, the reason I'm telling you to pick this one, it is a lot easier than other ones because you have basically an army double the size of both the Western and Eastern Roman Empire. It's recently been split because of the death of Theodosius, I believe only a few years prior. Yeah, in 395. Actually, he had just died. Okay, so he just died. This split has just happened. And basically, the Huns now cause a lot of problems, mostly for the Western Roman Empire, and just are one of the contributing factors that eventually led to their collapse. But also, you have to think about the time period. This is 395. Attila the Hun is coming about 40 years later. From what I understand, he becomes the Empire's primary heir around the year 400. I was under the impression he wasn't in the mod at all, but I have been told that you can play as him if you just wait a little while, which is interesting. So that's something to look forward to. Plus, they have a unique form of government, which is nomadic. It's sort of like a unique form of tribal government that has been put into the mod, which is pretty cool. And then also just the fact that you can raid with this obscenely huge army. So once you're done with all these wars, you can pretty much just stack your cash, make ridiculous amounts of money. And I also think they do get like a grand raid casus belli. I'm not able to check that right now, but I'm pretty sure they get something that lets them just like take large swaths of money anyway from over the border. I could be wrong about that, but just a really cool area, a really cool time period in history. Obviously, Attila the Hun, the Scourge of God. I plan on actually doing a playthrough of him very soon, but I would be remiss if I didn't recommend the Huns, considering their influence on this time period. So I think I would personally be remiss if I didn't include Stilicho. There's another character from the same time period who actually fought against Stilicho and fought for the Roman Empire, who we'll be talking about next. But Stilicho was the caretaker of Honorius. He is often considered one of the last Romans. I believe he's either half Goth or half Vandal. I can't exactly remember. But this dude basically kept the Western Roman Empire together for a lot of its early period following the death of Theodosius. Ultimately, he was assassinated by Honorius later on because he was a little worried about his power. But this dude, I mean, he was an exceptional military leader, just an exceptional statesman in general, a really cool character to play as, and it would be interesting to see if you could somehow survive his unfortunate fate and perhaps even position him to become the Western Roman Emperor. I do believe most people agree, or I would assume a lot of people agree, that he very likely was trying to position his son to be the eventual emperor. I don't think he was himself trying to do it, but it would be very unlikely that somebody who had, as you can see, as much power as he did over the entire Italian peninsula wasn't trying to position himself for greater things. It's kind of an unfortunate character, a bit complicated, but overall, he cared a lot about Rome. He gave a lot to Rome and was ultimately betrayed for it. So maybe you can find a better ending for him. And like I said a second ago, this one's sort of a no-brainer. We have Alaric of the Visigoths. As you can see, he starts off at war. But this is an interesting character because he initially fought for Rome, and I don't remember if this is exactly the reason, but I believe he kept getting stilted for his service, like he wasn't getting properly rewarded, wasn't getting properly recognized, and eventually just sort of broke away with his Visigoths, who would eventually control huge parts of like southern France and a lot of Iberia as they migrated across the land, which I believe this war is actually a war of migration. but he ultimately became the first person in about 800 years to sack Rome. That's a huge deal. So if you want to try to replicate that, it's very easy to do so. This is probably one of the easier starts on the list besides the Huns. He starts off incredibly strong. You're pretty much just going to be able to steamroll and just hit up Rome. But it's a cool character. I mean, Alaric is that dude. It would be a mistake probably not to include him on this list considering his importance in this time period. It's also interesting that so many of these really huge, larger-than-life characters are from the same 395 start. But Alaric is a no-brainer recommendation from me. He's very cool. Very fun character, and he has a lot of potential after you sack Rome, or you could just keep sacking Rome and just do it forever. So for this next one, we're actually just going to go to the bookmark because I want to recommend the struggle for Britannia in general. This is a really interesting period because it's just following the Western Roman Empire's collapse, and Britain as a territory has been basically left to defend itself. You have a lot of really interesting characters and figures from this period. You have obviously the kingdom of Gwynedd or Gwynedd. Would be modern day Wales. So these are like Britons. These are Romano Britons. So like this Duke Ambrosius Aurelianus. This guy supposedly is one of the inspirations for King Arthur. I actually recently did a playthrough of him. If you're interested in seeing how that went. House Ceredigne, or House Ceredigne, I believe, is the historical founder of the family Wessex and the kingdom of Wessex. So a ancient ancestor to Alfred the Great. And then you obviously have the Saxons, the Angles, and the Jutes who are also invading. So there's a lot of interesting things happening during this time period. I believe the 400s, 500s, and 600s is a relative dark age literally in terms of British history, as if we don't have a lot of written record of it. So you can sort of write that record here, which is why I don't recommend a specific one. I think you can just sort of choose whatever you want. You could also play as the Picts up north, which I recommend because they're very cool. But again, you don't have to pick anybody in particular. You could try the difficult one, or you could do one of the easier ones. It's really up to you. I just think it's a start that's worth checking out because it has a struggle, and that's cool. So this one's a bit of a later recommendation. This is a 476 recommendation, and this is the Kingdom of the Soissons. This is following the Western Roman Empire's collapse and is in what would to them be Gaul. So you're basically the last remnants of the Romans in Gaul. It was like a very briefly lived kingdom. I believe it was just this guy and his son that ruled it for a very short period of time because the Merovingians ended up coming in and basically completely destroying the kingdom and eliminating them and then taking over the area. And then they would eventually give way to, I believe, the Franks and Charlemagne, and then you know the rest. But it's a really cool area. I believe Clovis does show up. I think it takes 10 years and he invades you. I can't remember the exact timeline. I don't even remember if it's Clovis, but I do think he's in the mod as well. I don't think you can start as him, but I think you can play as him after that, which is really, really cool. But it's very challenging. The invasion is super hard. You have a lot of options in this start date, but if you can manage to survive it, I would probably say this is one of the harder starts in the mod in general, but if you can manage to survive it, you can basically have a really clear path to restoring the Western Roman Empire after that. You just have to, not die. All right, now this one is a bit of a different one. This is playing as the Kingdom of Himyar. I believe this character might be based off of Rabia ibn Nasr, who's a legendary Yemeni king, or some people think that he is one of the people that inspired this king, or maybe have been this king. The history in this time period is a bit weird, but I believe his son was the first king of the Lakhmids. Supposedly, if this is the same character that I'm thinking of, he had a dream of the coming of Muhammad, which would happen a couple hundred years later. This area is uniquely, though, it's Jewish in comparison to the Christian Byzantines in the north, and then obviously the Sassanid Empire. So it's unique in that regard, and also it's just a Middle Eastern start, and I really wanted to put something on there. Plus, it's a Yemeni kingdom that had a lot of influence in its day, and you don't hear a lot about it, so I just wanted to recommend it. And finally, all the way in 532, we have somebody who is often called one of the supposed last Romans, although a lot of people get that title. This is Belisarius, one of the greatest generals in history. He served under Emperor Justinian the Great, or Justinian the First. And over the course of a little over 6 years, he conquered not only the Vandal kingdom of North Africa in 534, but he retook much of the Italian peninsula from the Ostrogoths, which culminated in the capture of their capital in Ravenna in 540, and basically their collapse shortly afterwards. His gameplay reflects this long history of campaigning and has a quest chain where you take command of legions and reconquer both those kingdoms. So basically, after I think it's a couple years, you get sent down to Africa, and then you have to defeat the Vandals, and then a couple years after that, you get sent, or I think it's a year after that, you get sent north into Italy and have to retake them all the way up to Ravenna, and then you get a small territory there. It's pretty cool. It's pretty unique. It's like a fun gameplay mechanic. He's a really good character. just in general. So if you just want to play as somebody strong, you can't go wrong with Belisarius. Plus, he's a really cool individual from, I would argue, one of the highlights of Byzantine Empire. Justinian was one of the greatest emperors in Roman history in general, so he's a great person to serve under, and Belisarius was definitely one of the best generals Rome ever had. So that is going to be it for this one. I hope you guys like these recommendations. If you have any of your own, please leave those in the comments. Obviously, these are a lot of the bookmark characters, but I just wanted to point some out to some people so that they had something fun to pick. But that's going to be it for me. I'm Sol. This has been Starts I Recommend in the Fallen Eagle for CK3, and I will happily see you in the next one.